You're listening to The Power of Three, the Doctor Who podcast that likes to go here, there and everywhere as we celebrate Doctor Who in all its forms. And today we're going to be celebrating somebody whose contribution to Doctor Who must not, should not and will not ever be forgotten. Justin Richards, who was the range editor of the BBC Books range for many, many years, and of course contributed to a number of Big Finish series as well. I'm Kenny Smith, and I'm joined today by my fellow book lover, my Pieces of Eighth co-host, the one and only Mr. Matt Michael. Hello, Matt.
Hey, Kenny, how are you doing?
Very well, apart from the cold, but
yeah,
that's what you get when you come back to Scotland, rainy Scotland, after you've been in Salou and enjoying high temperatures, and then coming to Scotland where it's cold and wet. So, yeah. What's the difference between Scottish summer and a Scottish winter, Matt?
I don't know.
7 degrees.
Genuinely don't know. I when I used to live in Falkirk, I often tell people, and they think I'm exaggerating, but I swear one year it started raining in September and it stopped raining in April, and I get laughed at. I'm like, no, I'm genuinely not exaggerating. I think it rained every day between September and April.
That's absolutely correct. And I live in East Kilbride, which is high up, so we always get rain. We've had snow in May before. That was like 3 years ago. So, yeah, it does happen. But we're not here to talk about Scottish weather. This is not the Scottish Weather podcast. We want to celebrate the wonderful Justin Richards, who wrote so many incredible books and audios over the years, not just fictional books, but factual books as well. I mean, for me, I think the first time I encountered Justin would have been through fanzines, and in particular in Vision, which he was editing during the Tom Baker seasons with Peter Anghelides.
Yeah, and I think I would have encountered his work the first time from the Missing Adventures. I'm trying to think that the first one that I probably would have read, because I kind of came to them a little bit later than they'd started. I think the first one I probably read was The Sands of Time.
Oh, what a fantastic one to get into.
Yeah, it's a brilliant Fifth Doctor, Nyssa Tegan. A better sequel to Pyramids of Mars than some.
It's a fantastic adventure, I think. And of course, the twist that's there at the end, I'm not going to spoil it for those who haven't read it, but what a brilliant twist it is. Even now, I just think that was so clever because I never saw it coming.
Yeah, it's a really clever book. And it was republished, I think, as possibly as part of the Monsters collection. I think about 2012 or 2013, something like that. And well deserved, a good choice to republish, because it definitely deserved a new audience.
Most definitely. And of course, I'd started with Justin's fiction way back in 93, I think it would have been, when Theatre of War came out, and just such a clever book, working on so many levels. And you're talking about lost Shakespeare play, or is it Doctor Who missing episodes? And that was one of the most clever things Justin did. He made something that's, very clever and literate and highbrow, and he made it so accessible to the general public. And I think that is a real skill, a man of real intellect and learning, and to be able to, and dumb down is not the phrase, it's just to be able to bring it to a level that people could relate to and understand. And I think that takes genius.
I think he wrote some really solid, good, fun, standout books, like all the way through his sort of Doctor Who career. So obviously I have read and listened to Theatre of War subsequently, but probably I'm most familiar with his work for the Eighth Doctor Adventures, and he started off obviously pretty early on in the first half dozen with kind of Option Lock, which was a really good, kind of clever story with a really neat hook about the sort of cops on the hill, which had a kind of mysterious vibe to it, weirdly folk horror-ish kind of book, and then a number of other really notable good Eighth Doctor novels, like the Banquo Legacy, which is a really strong kind of murder mystery gothic kind of novel. The Burning, which
Oh,
relaunched the range in like fantastic, stylish style. And then he sort of concluded the big arcs of the range with like Sometime Never and the introduction of the kind of Council of Eight and the conclusion to all of the Sabbath adventures. So he wrote some kind of both notable for their importance to the ongoing stories in the books, but they're notable because, as you say, he could like make quite complex sci-fi plots understandable um, and kind of easy to follow on the page. So you didn't feel like you were reading a textbook. You felt like you were reading a novel which had some good science behind it.
yeah. Could throw demontage in there as well,
Yes, yeah.
which is good. No, I mean, I've actually got quite an emotional connection with Time Zero because I was reading that on the 7th of September 2002, and that was the night that my dad died. And
Right.
I was sat at my dad's bedside, holding his hand, one hand, and in the other hand I had Time Zero and was working my way through that. And I'd done my shift and went home, and dad passed away, just like 2-3 hours later.
Right.
And obviously bereft. I hadn't lost my mum at that point, so that was the first parental loss. And in the grieving process, going to Time Zero actually helped me because it took me away from the horrible, horrible world of real life. And Time Zero sort of got me through it, and just I carried on, reading that, and it sort of reminded me that life goes on, and it was so important to me. And I've never actually told him that. I told his son Julian how important it was to me, and I wish I'd had the chance to tell him that because it's just a wee personal thing, and it means a lot to me, and I feel that Justin helped me through that horrible, horrible grieving process just with that book. And the ongoing Eighth Doctor arc was great. It really, obviously Steve had taken things to the conclusion that he'd got to, and then it's a clean slate. The Burning is just such a great book. I mean, it's so clever, and we will discuss this soon on Pieces of Eighth when we return to the books. The opening chapters where you don't know who the Doctor is. There are so many characters who it could be, and you're left guessing, and it was not the one who I expected it to be.
No, it's I think a book that's kind of quietly radical, and I think that's probably a hallmark of his work, is that because it's not overtly in your face about its radicalism, it's easy to sort of go, oh well, this is just another Eighth Doctor, but they're not just another Eighth Doctor novel or Fourth Doctor or whatever. They're clever books. They're books that have a lot of thought, and cleverness in the plotting. Lots of really good twists. I'm thinking of some of his past Doctor novels as well. Things like The Shadow in the Glass had some really clever twists, and Dreams of Empire. I seem to remember, being quite impressed that here was a second Doctor novel that finally kind of hit the mark. Because I think Virgin often kind of swung and missed with many of their second Doctor novels. So I think it was quite an early BBC second Doctor novel, and it really kind of landed well.
Yeah, I think it was something like the 12th. It was, as you say, very early, and it very much was on and it was one of the early good Black Sheep covers as well.
Yeah.
So, but of course, I mean, Justin, you mentioned there, Shadow in the Glass, writing that over Christmas with Steve Cole to get it turned around when something dropped out. And he did the same with Millennium Shock further down the line as well.
Yeah.
As a sequel to System Shock, which you would never know is just so tightly plotted, and the Doctor Harry relationship is so good in Millennium. I just want to go and reread them all. And that's sort of, that's the sad thing, that you think, I really want to read them, but you can't tell them how much you enjoyed them. And I mean, I wouldn't say that I knew Justin properly. I knew him through a lot of contact for Big Finish things, a lot of exchanged an awful lot of emails over the years and quite a few phone calls and things like that. But never, I wouldn't say that, I never knew him socially or anything like that. But even though, I'd known that he'd been ill for quite a long time, it still hit hard because his work has made such an impact. I mean, we haven't even talked about his audios yet.
Oh, and all his he wrote some great Benny books as well.
Yes.
So I think the Medusa Effect, for example, is a fantastic book. But yeah, his audios. So was it the third Big Finish?
Whispers of Terror.
Whispers of Terror, which I still think is one of the standout Sixth Doctor audios, because he really writes it. He really kind of captures Colin's on-screen voice, and I think obviously over time Colin wants to move away from that, but I often go back to Whispers of Terror when I want to listen to the Sixth Doctor as I remember him as a child, because I think it's the truest encapsulation of his character on audio. So really enjoy that one.
Red Dawn, I just loved from the moment I heard it. I think it's got a fantastic, debut musical score from Russell Stone, but the plot of it is just great. Mankind goes to Mars and they find the Ice Warriors rather than previous stories we've had the Martians coming to us. And it's wonderful. It's just so well structured, and the Ice Warrior culture and society, and he builds so much in such a short space of time.
Yeah, it's a really brisk play, I think. And again, it kind of, obviously Big Finish moved beyond just trying to repeat what's on screen, but I do quite value when the audios kind of flick that switch in my brain that makes me think, oh yes, this feels like it's something I'm remembering from being a kid. And Red Dawn also has that. I could picture that brilliantly easily in season 21.
Yeah.
And there's not many Fifth Doctor, I think there's only a couple of Fifth Doctor and Perry plays without RMM in them. And RMM, really like the character, but it does take it a little step away from the authenticity of season 21. So having Red Dawn and being able to relive the season that made me a fan is it's cool.
Yeah, and I can still hear Russell Stone's Ice Warrior tune in the background for the beat for it. Yeah, and all the sounds as well. Love it. Absolutely love it. And of course, it would be remiss of us not to mention The Time of the Daleks, which pretty much is a summation of Justin's two big loves in life, apart from his family, of course. It is Shakespeare and Doctor Who, and as McGann fans, we absolutely love this one. It's, for me, I listened to it at the time and thought, this is clever, because I did a bit of Shakespeare, not a huge amount, but I completely got where Justin was coming from with it, and it's just clever, to quote Cybermen.
Yeah. I know there have been many Paul McGann versus the Daleks audios now, but it was the first one, and there can only ever be one first one. So yeah, it has a special place in the affections of anyone who was kind of listening to these plays in 2002.
Yeah,
you didn't know that there was ever going to be another Paul McGann versus the Daleks, and there wasn't for another 3-4 years.
Yeah, so we got Terra Firma. But I mean, I can still quote the end of episode 3. This is the end of history as we know it, and the start of the time of the Daleks. And just it's brilliant. I just love it, and it's one that I will be listening to again very, very soon when my app starts functioning. So that would be good to hear. Again, pop that and Red Dawn on. So we've spoken a bit about Justin now, so maybe we should hand over to some people who actually knew him and in some cases for many, many years. And we're talking to friends and people who've worked with them professionally. So let's hand over to them. And we'll start with Peter Anghelides.
Hello, I'm Peter Anghelides, and I edit and write and produce a variety of things for Big Finish and for BBC Books.
And of course, as I said before we started recording, for me, your name is synonymous with that of Justin Richards through the power of that Envision run that you did.
Yes, Justin and I met through Doctor Who, as with so many of my friends. I did a fanzine with some friends called Frontier Worlds in the late 70s, early 80s, and Justin was a contributor to that. This was in the days pre-internet, so correspondence was always via the mail, letters pages. So if you published a magazine 3 months apart from the last one, the correspondence was responding to something that had been said 3 months before, not 3 seconds or 3 minutes or whatever on the internet. So we were contributing to each other's fanzines. I think that the first thing he must have written for us was a review of one of the Panopticons. And of course we met at things like conventions, including one that used to run in Blackpool every year in the days when the Blackpool exhibition for Doctor Who was still running. But we also knew each other because we worked for IBM together. In fact, my job at IBM was because Justin had said there was a vacancy in the department he was working in Warwick. I was living at the time in Oxford, so I applied for that and got the job. And for a while, in a row, in the office I worked in Warwick was me, my future wife, Craig Hinton, who'd moved from the Portsmouth office to Warwick, and Justin. And I spent 32 years at IBM and indeed met my wife there. So in many ways, Justin was a big influence on my life, personally and professionally.
Absolutely incredible. And I suppose that was the thing that we'd had, how Jeremy Bentham had previously done CMS, as it was, wasn't it?
Yes, Jeremy Bentham had published some reference works. He used to be the archivist or the reference person for the Doctor Who Appreciation Society, and then he moved on and set up Cybermark Services to do a part work which came out every month talking about each Doctor Who story from a production perspective, and I found that quite fascinating. So so it's a part work which was loose leaf publication, and one came out each month. And I was fascinated by television production as well as television writing, and so was Justin. And we had followed this series through its first few years. And we had an idea, because I'd been working in publishing and Justin was working as a technical author, so we had some idea about the mechanics of printing and the possibilities. So we wrote to Jeremy Bentham and said, here are some suggestions about what you could do with what was called an adventure in time and space. Here's some things you could do which would make it more of a magazine. Here are kinds of content you could think about doing. And what we didn't know at the time was that Tim Robbins and Gary Hopkins were moving on. They'd got to the end of the Pertwee era and decided that they'd let someone else have a go. So Jeremy wrote back to our surprise and said, "Thank you for your job application. I'm happy to appoint you to the role." Which wasn't what we were expecting, but we were very happy to take on that opportunity. So we came in at the time that Robot was going to be the next story. And so we did all of the Tom Baker stories. And to be honest with you, we'd have carried on doing it if we'd had more time. But it became a big chunk of our lives alongside regular work. And I think by that stage, I think we might both have got married as well. So anyway, we moved on at the end of the Tom Baker era. But the difference was that this was a magazine printed to, with a so it's bound, and you could get a magazine, and that made it easier as well to sell in specialist bookshops like Forbidden Planet. And you could do things with layout. And because I'd been working for a publisher, no, actually, I was working still for the publisher, so I knew a typesetters in Banbury. So in the days before cheap and efficient desktop publishing was widely available, we used to get this typesetter, this place in Banbury, and then lay out strips on paper and then take that back to the printers, and they would print it as a full colour magazine.
Incredible stuff, because it's the difference between them was night and day. And yes, it was always a I highlight going into Forbidden Planet in Glasgow and picking it up, and I've got a near complete set of Invisions. I'm just missing a few of the Davisons, other than, I think it's 5 Doctors and Resurrection are the 2 I'm missing. Other than that, I've got the complete run, so...
Usually I get a bit cross when people take my stuff and put it freely available online, but Invision is so long ago, and it's obviously derived from lots of other things and wasn't a profit-making thing anyway, that I was quite pleased to see that the Internet Archive has now got all of the issues available online as PDFs, which you can read online.
Which is lovely. But of course, throughout all this, of course, your friendship with Justin is underpinning everything, and I know that worked together professionally as well over the years, as well in Doctor Who terms.
Yeah, Justin is the reason why I got a job at IBM. And it was interesting to go to this software lab in Warwick, which is where we both worked for, five or so years before I moved to a different software lab nearer to Winchester. And I used to joke with him that everyone seemed to know him. And of course, IBM is a company where everyone refers to each other by their first name. So as we were walking around the building to go to a meeting or to get lunch or whatever it happened to be, people would say, "Hi, Justin," and he would say hello back. And the running gag was, "You know everyone." But actually it was characteristic of his affiliative nature that he was well known and well liked, and he was one of those people who, when you saw them, you would want to say hello rather than, "Oh, let's just cross the road to avoid this person." And that was characteristic of his work at IBM, and also, of course, the way in which he worked with people in the Doctor Who world as well.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing, that a lot of what he brought to the Doctor Who world, stuff that he learned sort of professionally as well.
Justin was fun to work with. He was fun to work with at IBM. He was fun to work with on Doctor Who and Blake 7 things as well, because he knew about writing, because obviously he was a splendid writer himself, but he was also good about understanding the structure of stories. I think part of that is the instinct you get from doing lots of writing, but also he'd got a degree in English and theatre studies, which obviously informed some of his earlier books more than others. And so that meant he understood the structure of a story and also how to resolve plot problems, if you had them, or character notes. And he was very good about providing you with a helpful push or steer in the right direction without telling you exactly what to do. Now, sometimes if you asked him, he would volunteer a suggestion, and that was great. But he wasn't stamping everything in his own image on other people's stuff. And once I became a script editor for Big Finish and an editor for BBC Books, I tried to let that inform the way in which I work with other writers as well.
Yeah.
To help them be as good as they can be.
Very much so. So how was he to work with professionally? Was he somebody you could bounce ideas off and encourage you? I mean, you said obviously to make you be the best that you can be, but I'd imagine that he's somebody who would be very much the person you want on your team.
Justin was very organised and quite calm. I don't recall him ever panicking. And I was trying to remember, it sounds like an odd thing to say, I was trying to remember if I'd ever seen him angry, which is not an odd thing to think about somebody, isn't it? But the reason for that, because I didn't want to say, I've never seen him angry, but honestly, I can't remember him being angry. I can remember him being frustrated with things occasionally, but that was not the same as flying into a rage. So he was calm, and even when things weren't working out. So thinking back to Envision, one of the things that we sometimes did was we'd get towards the deadline when we were supposed to get the magazine sent off to Jeremy. Jeremy was a contributor to the magazines, but also he was the person who did all of the mundane but essential distribution work. But we'd come to this deadline when he needed to get these things posted out to people and off to the shops and that kind of stuff. And there would be occasions when, for whatever reason, we hadn't got the thing ready in time. Sometimes it was because there was some late-breaking thing that had arrived and we wanted to include that rather than save it for a later issue. And so we would phone him up and explain in plaintive terms that it wasn't going to make the dates. And our reward for doing this was sometimes that Jeremy had already planned to go on holiday, so he would send us all of the boxes and address labels and sticky tape so that we had to do that mundane but essential posting stuff out. So that was either our reward or punishment. Well, obviously we tried not to do that, but that was an example of where, it wasn't this is all a complete disaster. It was, we need to make a positive decision about why we haven't met the deadline. Anyway, the joke was that Alison, Justin's wife, made us mugs, which said, "Shock news, InVision is on time and pigs fly." I don't think it was always that bad, but anyway. So I still have this mug, and it reminds me of those times we were working on things.
That's amazing. And for those who didn't see, which is all of you, apart from me, you have just held that mug up. And yeah, what a lovely thing to have, a lovely memento. And happy times and places being recalled through a mug. So tell us more about Justin and his love of Doctor Who. Do you know when he first got into it and what his favourite stories were?
And I think the best person to ask that would be his son, Julian, because he talked a lot about Doctor Who with Julian. I think Justin's favourite Doctor was Patrick Troughton. I think he loved them all, but I think that was an early thing that he was keen on. Part of that, I think, is he was a school child watching that era on the telly, but also he had managed to get to a studio recording of episode 3 of The Web of Fear.
Wow.
He and his brother Robert, and his mum, they were supposed to have gone to an exhibition in London which had Doctor Who as part of it, and the queues were so long that they turned around and come away. And so Justin's mum, I think, had written to the BBC to say how disappointed they'd been, and as a result they got invited to go to a studio recording, which is astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Justin wrote an article for my fanzine about this, and because he was such a joker, I suspected that this was another joke. It was a prank and needed to be persuaded that it wasn't. But he had evidence. He got Patrick Troughton's autograph and Fraser Hines' autograph and so on. And so he wrote this up and we published it in our fanzine. Yeah, so we got to meet Patrick Troughton in the studio and see Yetis with their tops off, and he says that the thing he remembered most of all was Patrick Troughton's braces.
Huh.
So anyway, that was an example of, I think, why Patrick Troughton was such a favourite of his.
Yeah, reading Dreams of Empire, that comes across that he really loves that era, and that's lovely to know. I did not know that, so there you go, new facts.
When he wrote Dreams of Empire, he may have said this on a podcast, or certainly he mentioned it to me, was that he wanted to be able to establish the character of the Second Doctor early. So there's all that business with him sitting on a sandwich, which seemed like a bit of nonsense for the beginning of the story, but it was sort of setting an expectation that once you have that in your mind, that's how you read the rest of the book. So that was quite an interesting example of simple, slightly silly characterization up front.
I love that.
Justin was a great enthusiast for Doctor Who and had an encyclopedic mind for things like dialogue and scenes and characters and visuals. And this was very useful when a group of us used to get together at his parents' house in Dumbleton. His father was a vicar at the local church. Anyway, so we used to go along. And one of the things that used to get done was scratch videos. So in the days before YouTube and the days before there were easy editing tools, we used to connect up 2 VHS recorders. And you could then copy from one to the other, and more often than not it was making copies of Doctor Who stories to share with pals. There was a network of people who'd got copies of these things, and it was a great way of sharing before VHS copies and CDs and DVDs and Blu-rays. Anyway, so one of the things it was possible to do was do clips of individual stories which went against a soundtrack, and sadly today we've just heard that Bonnie Tyler has died, and that immediately made me think of Total Eclipse of the Heart, because that was one of the tracks we had used to edit clips on top of, and the idea was you literally interpreted what the song was saying with clips from Doctor Who, and Justin's encyclopedic knowledge of Doctor Who, along with people like Peter Lovelady and David Richardson and Andrew Martin and Andy Lane, meant that we could find the right clips for putting things together. So for example, Turn Around Bright Eyes. So turn around, it can be, Link's turning around in the Time Warrior, and Bright Eyes is when Cassia's eyes light up in the Keeper of Traken. Every now and then I fall apart was the TARDIS exploding from the Mind Robber. Total eclipse of the heart. I think there's an eclipse, isn't there, in the Mask of Mandragora? And then Heart is when Eldrad gets stabbed by the spear in the hand of Vic. So it was that kind of thing. I mean, you might say, well, that's pretty low-grade humour, but it was. But it made us laugh. And it was very painstaking. It took forever. But the fact that people like Justin were there who knew Doctor Who meant that we could wind to the right bit of that episode on the VHS tape, line it up, re-record it, move on to the next bit.
Great. It's reminded me because I met myself and Alistair McGowan once made a start on doing one for Madonna's Rescue Me, which we thought was appropriate because a lot of people have needed rescued over these. I'm drowning throughout your rope and finding relevant moments from. So it was a Horrifying Rock, I think we might have used potentially for that. But yeah, there's wee things like that. So yes, they're amazing scratch videos. They are always a highlight of conventions and fan Olympiads and stuff over the years.
Oh yeah, that was the reason for doing it, was have fun ourselves, but also share it at, for example, with Blackpool Get Together. Whoever organised it, I think it was variously Jeremy Bentham, David Howe, Craig Hinton were among the people who organised these weekends, and they would book out the whole of a guest house, the Lyric Hotel, on the front at Blackpool, and Doctor Who fans would get together, get rooms in this same guest house, visit the exhibition, walk down the prom, but also get together in the dining room of this hotel or this boarding house and watch old Doctor Who episodes on a VHS player.
On what we would have thought was a big TV back in those days.
Oh, an enormous TV. It used to be balanced on top of a table, so that people at the back of the room could see it. It was quite a ramshackle arrangement.
But that's what we did back in the day.
It was. That's what we did for fun.
Exactly. I mean, it's just wonderful that Doctor Who is just such a big part of Justin, but there was a lot more to him than that, of course, because he is, as we know, a very big family man with Alison and, of course, with the boys as well, with Julian and Chris.
Yes, it's nice that Julian has got involved in doing Doctor Who things for Big Finish, because he's both of his sons were interested in watching Doctor Who, but Julian has a very similar background to Justin, did a similar degree at the same university, has gone on to write things for various series of Big Finish. Justin's interest in Doctor Who also informed the way in which he did things with BBC Books, as we know that he's written lots of novels for them, but he also was involved in commissioning them, including commissioning and sometimes writing the reference books or ways of telling stories in a different way. So, the series like The Secret Lives of Monsters, or The 365 Days of Doctor Who, or The Book of Lists, just to choose three quite different examples of, they're technically speaking, they're non-fiction, because they're not a straightforward narrative, but they rely on a clever perspective and informed interest in the content and history of Doctor Who. And I think that's quite a nice way of doing things. Justin was also very good about spotting, if he was writing a book like the Time Lord Letters book. So that's a combination of things. That's understanding what people might have written letters about, whether it's to or from Winston Churchill or the Doctor's companions or whatever it happens to be. Justin wasn't a designer, but he knew designers and what was possible. So he had an idea about, what might look good as laid out with a letter, but also that it would have photographic references. So he had an idea about what those might be as part of the brief to the designer. He was commissioning books, thinking about what a year's worth of titles might look like. He was able, because of his business background, to liaise with the BBC Books people, not all of whom were necessarily Doctor Who fans or enthusiasts. And he was also able to talk to people like sales teams and distributors about what was the specific aspect of a particular book that might make it appealing to stick it in Waterstones or W.H. Smith. And that's the kind of thing that you see the visible output of what he's written with his name on. What you don't see is all the background stuff he was doing as well to make sure that the range kept going. And that's true of someone like Steve Cole as well. It was part of the role. You were asking about influence on my writing. So Justin and Andy Lane commissioned my first piece of Doctor Who fiction professionally, which was nice, which was Decalogue 3. For some reason, everyone remembers that as being the one that Stephen Moffat had a story in. I can't imagine why that's the case.
No idea.
So I got to write that. That was interesting. And at the time, we were sharing our various manuscripts and so on. So one of the things I remember reading for the first time was Justin's Theatre of War novel, which I thought was terrific from the off. My only observation about it was that the final line was something like, "Thank God it's all over." The danger in the story, in other words. And I said that might be a bit of a hostage to fortune for a first book, you know. It's either you saying that or it's people saying that when they're reading it. So I suggested an alternative. And because it was about theatre, I suggested something which was quoting Shakespeare. So let's see if I can find it. Braxiatel held his right hand level with his eyes. The hairs on the back of his hand were standing on end. He smiled and clasped his hands behind his back once more, smoothing the back of his right hand with the palm of his left. "Be cheerful, sir," he said to the commissionaire. "Our revels now are ended." "I'm sorry?" The commissionaire followed Braxiatel out into the corridor. "Be not disturbed," Braxiatel reassured him. "I was just paying homage to a great poet and playwright." So that was suggested, you know, why don't you use some quotes like that? That's what he then worked into the ending, you know, which is it's a more satisfying way of ending the story.
And it feels more in tune with the rest of the book as well.
Yes. And what was nice was when he wrote the acknowledgements, he signed a copy for me, saying thanks for the help and encouragement.
Oh.
He said, "I hope you'll enjoy the finished article, which, as you'll see, pays homage to a great friend and colleague," which is rather sweet.
That's amazing. That is such a lovely thing to put.
But Justin had a really good instinct for the important aspects of these things, and so, you know, the idea he was receptive to ending it differently. He's great on first lines. Have a look at a lot of novels, including Doctor Who novels, you know, scan through some and see for yourself. They often start with what the weather was like, or what the room looked like, or things like that. In fact, the Bulwer Lytton contest you may have heard of is as an annual competition for the worst first line, because Bulwer Lytton wrote the famous line, "It was a dark and stormy night." But Justin was quite smart about different lines, and Theatre of War has got a great first line, which is, "The history of Manaxus took 43 solar years to invent, and like all good lies, was grounded in truth." That's smart because it makes you go, oh, this is quite intriguing, I want to find out a bit more. And also, spoiler alert, it's the solution to the whole book on the first line. But because it's the first line, it doesn't immediately register as something that's going to continually stick in your mind as you're reading the rest of it, because it maneuvers its way through the rest of the narrative. That's very clever. And if you look at Plague of the Cybermen, one of his later ones, the prologue starts with, "In a landscape bled of all colour, Stefan was digging his own grave." Oh, you go, oh, right, that's put us right into the scene straight away.
Yep.
And if I look at one of his other books, The Invisible Detective, the other kids thought the place was haunted, but Arthur Drake never believed stuff like that. He walked past the antique shop on Cannon Street every day on his way to and from school. So that's putting it in a particular location, but giving it a different kind of spin. And that's not just true of the very first lines, but also the way in which chapters would end, the way in which chapters and sections would start. And it's just another example of, I think, how adroit Justin was at the key mechanics of writing a compelling story in simple, effective language.
Yep. I've just had a quick look at the Sands of Time.
Mm-hmm.
The woman was still alive as unnatural thunder cracked across the sky. I just think that tells you straight away what's going to happen to the woman. Is she going to die? Well, you'd assume she's going to die. And it's just it's so clever. Just little hints like that.
Yep.
Very, very good.
He's got a book called Pass Forward in his Time Runners series, which starts, it was 5 years after the president died and time was still standing still. Again, you read that and you go, oh, I want to know more. I once commented to him about one of the James Herriot books. I was trying to find a book when I was on holiday, when I was a lad, and I just picked up one from a shelf at a bookshop, and I can't remember the exact line, but it was something along these lines. I knew as soon as I saw it, it was the biggest dog I'd ever seen. Yeah, and that puts you exactly in the right place. So it is that kind of. The reason I mention that is because that's why I bought that book. I was just scanning through, which one of these shall I buy, and I just picked it off, opened the front page, and read that, and thought, I want to read the rest of this. So I bought it, and that was my book for the holiday.
That's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. Something that, with hindsight now, I'm really pleased is that, given that Justin was overseeing Doctor Who fiction as things were sort of just like winding down with the EDAs and the PDAs when they went monthly. And then, of course, the new series came back and boom, the magical word royalties comes into things.
Well, we could probably get down a rabbit hole talking about the way in which royalties have and haven't changed over the years. This is worth noting. Justin was very adroit at working with the people who were running Doctor Who as well, because he knew that whatever was being published needed to fit in with and enhance the series, and also it had slightly more constraints than the books had when the TV series wasn't on the air. So one of the considerations when he knew the series was coming back was, how can we bring the current set of books to a conclusion which is satisfying for the people who've been reading the books, but also allow for whatever the TV series did, because TV series was all a bit secretive about what the stories were going to be. Quite right. You don't want to have spoilers before it gets broadcast. But then also fitting things in with the TV series as and when it started to be televised, and novels which fitted in with that. Also worth noting about, Justin had a feeling for different styles of writing. So he'd written for Virgin books, which were for a slightly more adult audience. He'd written for BBC books, which were a bit more family friendly. He'd written for the new BBC books for the post-2005 series, which were shorter and aimed at a slightly younger audience again. He'd also written novels for helping children to read who were having perhaps reading difficulties with teaching aids and so on. He did something called Monster Island for Heinemann. So he'd got an idea about different kinds of audiences and being able to write for them without feeling that you were writing down or patronising them. And I think that was something which was also true of Terrance Dicks. Terrance Dicks talked about having a sort of Simenon-style simplicity of language that was easy to read without being oversimplified. And I think that was also characteristic of a lot of Justin's writing as well.
It's a very difficult time for yourself and Justin's friends and family, but you must have so many happy memories of him. And do you have one outstanding one?
It's difficult to choose one in particular because there was a kind of common thread of in-jokes and references, often to do with Doctor Who, but also to do with things that we'd experienced together. I was thinking about this let's link it to a Doctor Who story. So he wrote The Renaissance Man, one of the early Tom Baker stories for Big Finish. And in it, the thing that gives away that the memories of the individual aren't being properly understood by being taken from the Doctor sets a trap for the villain. And the trap is that the villain thinks that cow parsley is medicinal. Because early on, the Doctor says, cow parsley, good for a stomachache. And the point of that was, if you eat cow parsley, you get a stomachache, so it's good for giving you a stomachache. Whereas the villain interprets that as being a cure for stomachache. And I laughed out loud when I heard that, apart from the fact it's a great little twist and plot point, because it's a reference to something that he and I used to joke about. When I was first going out with my future wife, I used to visit her in a village near to Exeter, and we used to walk around the area, and she was able to identify different flowers and plants and say what they were, whereas the only thing I tended to recognise was cow parsley. So the joke was, I would point to it and go, that's cow parsley, and this became a joke with Justin as well, that's cow parsley, So the fact that he'd used that in the story was a kind of wink towards that being something that he and I joked with about my lack of knowledge about flowers. But it became a story about the villain's lack of understanding about what cow parsley was being used for, or could be used for.
That's amazing.
I use that as perhaps a really trivial example, but that was the kind of thing that infused our conversations. It was knowing winks and in-jokes and references and the common currency of a life shared over decades. And those are the things I'm trying to remember now.
Oh, Peter, thank you so much for sharing your memories of Justin. Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Hi, I'm Steve Cole. I'm the Doctor Who consultant editor for BBC Books.
Suppose, Steve, like myself, you would probably have first got to know Justin's name through the likes of InVision and fanzines.
That's right, yes. Way back when I was a teenager. I remember meeting Justin for the first time at the launch of the BBC Books at the Subterranean nightclub in Ladbroke Grove. I'd communicated with him before that because I had selected Option Lock for February 98's 8th Doctor novel. But yes, I was well aware of him from the InVisions that he and Peter had done. I guess I knew Peter's name slightly more because I used to get Frontier Worlds as well as a kid. But Justin's footprints were all over titles back then in the 80s anyway. And yes, and then I went on to read his new adventure, Sands of Time, and so I was familiar with the man before I met him.
And I think it'd be fair to say that this is somebody who was just the absolute perfect gentleman, Doctor Who fan who would never have a bad word to say about anyone or anything and would always be positive.
No, that's exactly right. And that's, I soon found that out. And that's the reason why when I decided to leave Doctor Who back in 2000, it was really only Justin I could go to and ask him to take over. I knew I had to have a successor that I could trust in because the range meant too much to me to just walk out and just let it go to anyone. So I really wanted Justin there because he had the necessary tact and diplomacy as well as the inventive mind, the unflappable nature, an ability to concoct a story very quickly, both with others and by himself. He got me out of more than one tight spot in the range. If an author didn't deliver, then that meant that you had a huge looming hole in the schedule. And getting Justin to write a book for me in pretty much 3 weeks exactly, from start to finish, demonstrated the skill of the man, but also his generosity in pushing himself that hard to do it. So, he was my only choice. And I was delighted when he was up for it. First taking over on the PDAs and then launching his own era with The Burning, of course, in around June 2000.
So what was Justin like when you were his boss? What was he like as a hired hand?
Well, just a really safe pair of hands, really. You could, he would always have another idea. And I could say to him, we're looking for this or looking for that, or how about this? And he would come up with an idea, twice as good, with a trademark twist in there. And so it was always very easy, very effortless working with Justin. The manuscripts were always in good condition. I would edit them, of course, and ask him to do this or do that. And he always did that without complaint. Pretty much, dream of an editor really is to have someone who's reliable, punctual, and very talented. And Justin was one of those people who could. It wasn't just putting everything into one book and then the rest are kind of diminishing returns. He was always incredibly reliable. Some would hit harder, some would be a little less good, but that was fine because it was all part of an ongoing exercise in just creating really good fiction. And really good non-fiction as well, of course, because the very first things that we worked on was the Book of Lists, which Nuala had commissioned before me, but that gave me an idea of how encyclopedic his knowledge was. And so it was also very useful as a resource for some of the really obscure or arcane stuff, especially as he had been involved in the Virgin Adventures as well. So I was able to get his take on those and how sort of in terms of managing how the continuity between one range and the other went. So yes, it was so good working with him that when I then moved on to become the senior editor of the children's fiction list at Simon & Schuster, I approached Justin to write for me there as well. And I think it's after leaving him to do Doctor Who and then going to work, I think our friendship kind of deepened from there. He would commission me and I would commission him, and we'd meet up for lunch and very regularly. And, you know, I would meet up, you know, with our families. So it was a lovely friendship. The start with the children's novels, you know, he did The Invisible Detective for me, and then I did Time Runners, and then other publishers wanted him too. Of course, he did went to Faber and Faber with the Death Collector, The Parliament of Blood, and then I think it was HarperCollins who wanted Agent Alfie from him, much sort of younger, sort of more humorous stuff with a little James Bond twist. We would have little parallels, you know. I worked with the Ian Fleming estate, he worked with Jack Higgins on those books. So these little things would come into our lives and we'd be able to tell each other, and sometimes we'd be a little, you know, there was a little kind of friendly competition between us sometimes, but we were always incredibly supportive of each other's stuff, and we're always there to provide whatever was needed, whether it was an eye, whether it was a little cosmetic rewrite. When I was writing my Zedrix novel, I remember I got Justin to just kind of like step in and have a check that I was getting it right, because it was quite a big book for me. So yeah, it was lovely having someone that you trust well enough to share that with, you know, to show someone, you know, you're creatively vulnerable as well as, you know, when you're, you know, doing the same for them. It was it was a very very good and rewarding friendship we had.
Yeah, because I mean, I think the Invisible Detective books were fantastic. I remember seeing them advertised on TV. Must have been when Katie must have been maybe about 2, way back in 2008, something like that, and saying, "Oh, by Justin Richards." And obviously, I knew your books with Astrosaurs, which she read as well. So we started getting Justin's books as well. And
yeah, he got some really good deals. You know, it was so it wasn't just. That's quite crucial. He didn't want to just be a Doctor Who writer. He wanted, you know, he was a writer. Doctor Who was his passion, and of course, he continued as the creative consultant and contributing editor to the BBC Books list, but was always, you know, doing other stuff, doing stuff for Del Rey, you know, proper sci-fi. We got involved in some sort of fledgling interactive TV stuff on the periphery. With there was some BBC initiative that I can't remember how we got involved in it, but we did some speculative script stuff for that. We did some speculative audio script for another project that Justin had come up with the idea and wanted a co-writer. So yeah, he had his fingers in many pies, and they were always good pies.
Yep, nothing half-baked about Justin Richards' work.
No, exactly.
So, of course, you left the EDAs, but it wasn't long before you were back with the New Order title-inspired Vanishing Point. So how did you find Justin to work for as an editor with the roles reversed?
Well, he had stepped in and done some editing on Parallel 59, because we were sort of building up to, I think by then we knew that he'd be taking over at some point. Peter Anghelides was the main editor on that, and Justin read it as well. And then also, of course, he had edited The Ancestor Cell, which was Peter and I. And then I edited The Burning for him, even though it was his first one as the range consultant. I mean, we hatched the... I basically said we need to destroy Gallifrey just to really clear the way and, you know, draw that line in the sand that then, you know, you can then take over Justin. So we did, I guess, perhaps that line in the sand was a little bit too sharp. It did cut through a lot of things. It meant that the Ancestor Cell had to be a bit of a shopping list of things to wind down before Justin took over. But so we were around that time we were all kind of like very much involved in each other's stuff. And I guess Vanishing Point came along because Justin knew that I was happy still to contribute as an author, if not an editor. And yeah, I think it was very easy, as I recall. It didn't feel like a huge switch to be edited by Justin. He was very calm and kind and courteous, as he was in all things. And it was a very smooth and easy process, made less smooth by the fact that then the very same month I had to co-write another book with him because an author had dropped out, and we had to write The Shadow in the Glass in a couple of weeks over Christmas, which was, that was a ludicrous situation and an insanely tight turnaround, but actually worked out really well. And I think we were both very pleased. And I remember Justin asked if I could do it. He said, "Remember how I helped you out with Millennium Shock?" Well, and so I said, "Of course, yes, I'm here. I'm here for you, even if I'll be writing on Christmas Day," which I was. Oh, that's fine. So it shows that I think that released in March or April, and we were writing the first draft in late December. We met in the pub and we discussed it, went through the storyline. I think I pointed out there weren't any female characters, so maybe we could have a journalist would be a companion to Colin, and that then Justin then suggested this amazing twist for the end of it that I found sort of horrifying and kind of too good not to do as well. So yeah, it was all in those sort of stressful situations when the other person isn't panicking, it means that you don't panic either. And so we both went through it quite calmly, and we divided the book up by storyline rather than by quarters or halves, and then just swapped each other's stuff and through it went. And I think that's probably my happiest moment of all the BBC books that I worked on was working with Justin on The Shadow in the Glass. And yeah, I think we came out with something good with that one.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And that ending, poor Claire. Poor Claire.
Poor Claire.
Oh, even now, it still gets me there. You swines, the pair of you. So, of course, Doctor Who came back with a bang back in 2005, and of course yourself and Justin and Jack Rayner were all there to relaunch the literary side of things.
Yes, that was a lovely surprise. The reason Justin got in me and Jack, I think, was because everything was very top secret, and it was all very much non-disclosure. This was kind of new territory for Doctor Who, of course, but they wanted people who were involved in the running of the range to do it, who understood the importance of tight lips, and who also were flexible enough to respond to what was still the show was still being made. I mean, the first day when Justin, myself and Jack went to Cardiff to meet with Russell and the script editors, the rushes came in for Aliens of London. The very first shots came in of Eccleston and the Space Pig, and so we were there in the office when Russell saw them for the first time, and it really did feel like it was a new beginning in lots of different ways, and Doctor Who was suddenly different and felt remarkably fully formed. And so it was agreed that Justin would mimic the pattern of the opening episodes of the series, which a paradigm that's kind of lasted over the years. So we went for a historical Earth adventure first, then a sci-fi adventure on an alien planet second, and then the present day adventure third. So slightly altering the order of how things ran on TV, but I was told that there was no alien planet being visited in Series 1, and so my book would be the first to take Rose to this different planet. And Justin was very generous in this and said, "I think that's a lovely thing for Steve to do." He was more interested in getting a guided tour of Big Ben for doing the Clockwise Man. He was very excited at that. Jack was very excited at going to the Powell estate to be able to sort of plot things around there. And I was thinking, well, where can I go? I can't go to the Planet Justice yet. Then, of course, Rose went there for me on TV anyway. I mentioned it in Boomtown, so that was fine. But it was good. I was able to edit Justin's. Justin was able to edit mine as well as Jack's, and who worked with the script editors very closely, and so yeah, it was lovely to be involved with with Justin on something so special and so secret again. It was like all the work we'd done on the BBC books had suddenly paid off and led us to this point where we were tying in quite closely with the television show itself. So moving from keeping the light burning to getting scorched by its incandescence and heat, that was quite a shift. It was lovely to go along that with him.
And finally, royalties.
Yes, finally royalties. I remember I just had the commission for Astrosaurs, my children's book series, around that time, and so I was busy doing that. I couldn't write. Justin offered a book from the next three for Eccleston. He was doing the Deviant Strain, and he wanted me to do the next one, but I had to say no because I was busy doing the Astrosaurs. But when the royalties came in for the Monsters Inside, which were insane, as there wasn't much Doctor Who merchandise out then, and everyone bought the books. I was thinking this was a financial mistake. If I had gone with the second one as well. So when he asked me for to do another couple, one for Tennant, three more for Tennant, in fact, I was very happy to participate.
Just as you should do. Fantastic. And of course, you'd continue to work with Justin on his books, wouldn't you? You'd do the edits for him sometimes, wouldn't you?
Yes. I was always the person he would ask to edit him. I mean, because I was still doing the typesetting for the books, so I wasn't, and sometimes would proofread them. Sometimes I'd do editorial on them, but I wasn't involved in it directly because I remember I would be BBC books would ask me to do, I don't know, something like a proofread, and I'd come up with about 50 editorial suggestions, and they'd just say, you're proofreading it, you're not editing it. But it became really hard for me not to, because obviously that's what I'd been doing. I think it was just trained to do it. In fact, I still find it very difficult to read contemporary fiction because I just want to edit it the whole time. So thank you for ruining me, BBC books. But so I was always there to edit, and because we met socially so often, I'd always kind of hear what the latest thing was, what it was planning, and I'd sort of chip in with that or make suggestions or discuss authors. So it was nice to kind of keep involved and to play a part in things like the he trusted me to write out Angie, which was very nice, and to run his ideas of how to wrap up certain arcs. So it was nice to still be doing that with him. And right up to the end of those books. I think I did the penultimate one just before Lance came in and rounded things out.
Yeah. And of course, latterly, you've stepped back into the Doctor Who books hot seat, with Justin having left it with his illness. So it's nice sort of like to keep that continuity and friendship going.
Yes, that's right. I mean, when I found out something of what was happening to Justin, we didn't know at the time what exactly that something was, but it was clear that he was too tired and didn't have the concentration to maintain the workload. There was hope that I could come in just as like a temporary caretaker while he was taking some time out, and that I would then be able to pass it back to him if he was better. But sadly, he wasn't able to come back. So yes, it was an unexpected reintroduction to the range. It was just as Jodie Whittaker was getting ready to start up as the Doctor, so it was a new era, and I guess it felt like it was, at least it was the time to, it needed someone there to sort of transition across from Capaldi. So I had no hesitation about stepping in, because even from a distance, I'd always cared about the range and obviously cared about Justin. I was just sorry that, in the nicest possible way, I was sorry that I couldn't give it back to him.
I think that after all these years and 33 odd years of his involvement with Doctor Who printed literature, fact and fiction, he leaves a hell of a legacy behind him. And I think the outpourings of grief that I've seen on social media have been incredible. Just so much love for Justin and his work, and And it's just because he'd be embarrassed by it, wouldn't it? He'd just be like, "That's oh no," and just although he'd secretly be quite happy about it, wouldn't he?
He was always very self-effacing, which was lovely. And I guess I edited him so much I could see him setting up a twist. So I was always enjoyable at that, saying, "Aha, here it comes, the trademark twist." It's not to say I'm not saying that he wrote 20 formula, but you could see certain tricks that he would do, just because I knew his stuff so well, to working through it so well. But he could also really surprise and write really quite emotional stuff, quite horrific stuff. Obviously the pacey, hectic action as well, but also he caught characters so well. So he was such a good all-rounder, and a writer who could surprise, a writer you could always rely upon with a baseline of really good, and obviously went way above that curve many, many, many times. But you always knew you were in safe hands, embarking on an adventure with Justin.
Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kenny.
My name is Gary Russell, and I worked with Justin over the years on millions of books and millions of audios. They may not have been millions, but it felt like it at the time, because everywhere you kind of went, I always had Justin's voice in my head. Justin was always the sort of voice of reason that would go, yeah, are you sure this is the way you want to do it? Or are you sure this is a good idea? And I'd always have that little, it's like a little, the two devils on your shoulder, and they'd both be Justin. One would be the evil one going, I think you should really go for this. And the other one would be the little angelic one going, but are you sure? Are you sure that's how you want this to work? And he was a very good sort of, mixing my metaphors, he was very good Jiminy Cricket in everything he did, both books and audio.
So when did you first meet Justin? Because I'd imagine that with you both being involved in fanzine circles and fandom in the 80s, it must have come about then.
The first time I came across him, which is before I met him, would have been 1982. He was a friend of Andy Lane's, and they must have been at Warwick together at that point. And Justin's name would crop up in letter columns of fanzines and things like that. And I think I might have asked him to do something for Sharda, or I might have been talking to him. But the first time I met him face to face and just absolutely worshipped the ground he walked on was at the Longleat thing in 1983. And I was there with Peter Anghelides and Peter Lovelady and Andrew Martin. And likewise, none of them had met Justin at that point. We had all known each other through letters in the days when people used to write letters. And then finally we met him face to face. And we spent the whole 2 days with him. I mean, he just hung around with us, or we hung around with him. I can't remember which way it was really. But we all became fairly inseparable, and the evening stuff, we were always together. And that sort of, the group of us bonding at that point never went away. And that was 43 years ago.
That's a scary long time.
Yeah. I mean, think how many people listening to this podcast aren't 43 years old. And there's somebody that I've known since, he would have just turned 20 and I'd have been coming up for 20. Because, his birthday, actually, no, he wouldn't. He would have already been 20. He's a year older than me. Because his birthday is 4 days before mine. He was the 14th of September. So we're both Virgos as well. So it's a good sign in this kind of life. He was just great. And we spent a lot of time together doing stuff. Used to go up to Manchester and stay with the two Peters quite a lot. I used to go to Warwick to see him at university. Never was I happier that I didn't go to university myself than when I go and visit people like him and Andy. And they introduced me when they were at Warwick to Craig Hinton as well. The first time I met Craig was through Justin, and Justin introduced us all to David Richardson as well. They'd been friends, I think, through sort of letters and things. And of course, eventually they did a fanzine, Black and White Guardian, together. So he was just an important part of my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s, really. And
of course, you would later get the honour to work with him professionally.
Yes. I mean, the first thing, I suppose, where does professionally, I mean, I remember him being in the room when I found out I was writing Legacy for Virgin, because Theatre of War was commissioned at the same time. And so that was quite an exciting moment for both of us to get our first books commissioned together. It was like, oh, that was great. And then when Big Finish started, I remember, so we decided when we were setting up, when we got the license to do Doctor Who, and we thought, right, we now need to tell people and we need to get some writers. And so we got a load of people together in Gary Gillett's living room, because it was a huge living room. You could get a lot of people in there. And I remember talking with Jason about who we were going to have there. And obviously we were going to have Briggsy and Paul Cornell and Mark Gatiss, Stephen Moffat, Steve Cole. And I said, the person I want there more than anyone is Justin, because there's no one that will get what we're doing better than Justin. And I remember at that meeting, Justin was saying that the most important thing was to make scripts that could only work on audio, you know, to make them different from books and to make them different from comics and to make them different from TV and everything. He got it straight away that audio was this unique medium. I don't know if Justin was a huge audio drama listener. I certainly don't ever remember him being somebody that bought and regularly listened to the old audio visual things we did. But he was the first person I commissioned. Although other than Briggsy, obviously, Silence of Time was already commissioned by then. But he was the first person. He literally walked out of that meeting with the commission to do Whispers of Terror, because he'd already outlined it to me. And I think Mark probably went away knowing he was going to do Phantasmagoria as well. And then immediately, you know, he had delivered Whispers of Terror, and I was already commissioning Red Dawn from him. It was, you know, just an obvious person to have in those early days of Big Finish. And I think we'd probably got a lot more out of Justin if he hadn't then started editing and commissioning the BBC books, which kind of took up a lot of his time. We got him back. I remember saying to him, he'd said to me once that he'd always wanted to do a Dalek story. I don't think he'd done a Dalek story as a book for Virgin or the BBC, and he really wanted to do a Dalek story. And we were doing the second season of McGann stuff, and I wanted him involved in that. So the two came together, and he, you know, he had his love of Shakespeare, which had come through Theatre of War and everything as well. And so that was what this was about, was a young William Shakespeare with Daleks quoting Shakespeare, which is such a cool idea. I think that was the thing that sold it to me, was this synopsis, and it just had various bits of Dalek dialogue through the synopsis that were all just Shakespearean, not sonnets, but the speeches. Dalek speaking in iambic pentameter, I thought would be a great fun thing for Briggsy to do. So yeah, so we commissioned that again straight away. And then Gallifrey happened. And obviously we'd been doing the Benny stuff, and Justin had been very important actually in the setting up of the Benny range, because we'd started with books. We were doing adaptations of the novels on audio, but our first original stuff were novels. And he did the first one, Doomsday Manuscript, in which he did the whole setup. And he gave me this sort of 20-page outline, not for the book, but for the whole setup of the Braxiatel collection, and he created all those characters. Everyone that's in those early Bennies were all created by Justin, other than Peter, who was created by Jack. But, you know, he gave us Braxiatel, and immediately, you know, once when we were doing the audios, Miles came along, that sort of all fitted together beautifully. And he created Adrian Wall, who became Peter's father. And there was a gameskeeper or groundsman or something. All of these things, and he came up with the Trianons the Great and the Small Trianon and the Gardens and the whole of KS 195, something like that, I think the planet was called, that the Braxiatel collection was on. And all of that came from Justin, and that all just came in this document. He just sat down and worked out how to make it work and how everyone else could feed into it. And that was the amazing thing, because obviously, you know, Big Finish was young in those days. We didn't have much money. And I remember just saying, look, you do realize that there's effectively is a buyout. Everything you're giving me here isn't yours. You're not going to get a percentage every time somebody uses Braxiatel or Adrian Wall or that. And he was like, no, I don't want that. But he just wanted this opportunity to be incredibly creative and develop a Bible, if you like, because it was effectively a Bible for the Benny stuff. And this is before he ever did this similar sort of stuff for BBC Books. But I think this gave him his grounding and made everyone realise that Justin was very clever and very, very good at creating universes for other people to play with. And he had no ego about it, he had no proprietorial interest in any of it. It was like, I've given you that, off you go, let everyone play with it. And that's what he did. And it was the same when we came to do Gallifrey. I said to him, straight away I wanted him to be involved in Gallifrey, partly because I wanted to use Braxitel and I thought it would be the kind thing to do. But I remember I'd given him the Inquisitor. I'd already got Linda Bellingham to say yes. So I said to him, I want you to do a story, blah, 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 about the Inquisitor and everything. And I think he was half a draft in and phoned me up one day and said, I can't call her the Inquisitor. It's just boring. It's going to sound awful on audio. Can I give her a name? And I went, oh, I suppose we can. I mean, it's all going to go past the BBC. If they don't want the Inquisitor to have a name, I'm sure they'll say something. I said, I wonder what name we could have. And before I'd finished the sentence, he said, oh, she's called Inquisitor Darkhell. And I thought, fine, I'll go along with that. That's it. He'd already worked out, he was being very polite saying, what if? But he'd already actually worked out that he wanted to call her Darkhell. And in that one script, developed her and, set up, not that she was necessarily a villain, but certainly set up that there were layers to that character that we'd never seen on television. And again, allowed everyone else to run with it and just take that character and make her so important to those first few years of the Gallifrey series. And that all came from him.
Yeah.
He was a very clever man at creating stuff that other people could run and play with. And you saw that then with all the stuff he did with the BBC books afterwards.
And of course, you got to work with him quite a lot at BBC Books too.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Certainly Spiral Scratch and Instruments of Darkness were with him. I have a feeling that he was around at the time that Divided Loyalties, or no, he probably wasn't involved in Divided Loyalties. No, I think Instruments of Darkness and Spiral Scratch were the two of those that were totally edited by him. And then, of course, he did all the new series books as well. And he and I worked at great length together with those because I was doing, I was in charge of approving everything. And so he and I would sit down and he'd say, right, I've got a list of 10 authors that we could use over the next couple of years. Who are you going to say no to? Who is BBC Cardiff going to say no to? And we never said no to anyone. But yes, there was a lot of decision making. And also, of course, he was in charge of the Torchwood books as well. So yeah, he was a creative crucible, really.
Yeah. What's your outstanding memory of him? If you could pick one memory of Justin, what would it be?
It would have to be nothing to do with Doctor Who. It would be a personal thing. He and I went, actually did do Doctor Who, but the memory is a personal thing. He and I went to the location for Mark of the Rani, up at Stoke. I went up to Dumbleton to pick him up. And I can't remember whether I then drove up to Stoke or he then drove up to Stoke. I can't remember which, but the car broke down. Luckily on the way home, not on the way there. So we'd done everything we needed to do. It was dreadful weather. It was absolutely sheeting down with rain. We'd had a fun day with Colin and Nicola and Sarah Hellings and J&T. We'd had a fairly unfun day with Anthony Ainley. And we were sort of talking about that as we were driving home. And I genuinely can't remember his car or mine, but it just stopped dead on the side of the motorway. And we phoned the AA. And I think we were stuck there for about 2 hours. And we just talked. And we just talked about the whole universe at large and everyone we knew and everything we'd done with our lives at that point. And we would have been, in our early 20s at that one. Was it 1985? Yeah. So we'd only known each other a couple of years. And it was a real sort of big bonding experience for the two of us. And it was something we never forgot. And the guy that rescued us was this big Australian AA guy who referred to each of us as Blue. All right, Blue. And so this became shorthand for me and Justin for the rest of our professional lives, that we would randomly put the word blue into sentences if we were sending letters or emails to each other, particularly if we were doing notes on things. We'd there'd be things like, do you think this is going to work, Blue? And what on earth is going on here, Blue? And it just became the shorthand that we used for the next, 30 years.
That's amazing. It's incredible just, how many lives he's touched that you would never have known about, just through his writing and his work.
Well, there's a lot of people who I use at Big Finish in my time there who'd started off, Justin would phone me up and say, I've got this brilliant... Johnny Morris was one of them. Johnny Morris came... I think I commissioned Johnny. I think Blood Tide came out before Arachnophobia. I can't remember. But Justin had already commissioned him before me, but I think I was determined to get something of Johnny's out first. But he just raved about Johnny Morris's writing. He did the same about Simon Gurria's writing as well. I remember when Simon did his book, one with the traffic lights on the front, and Justin was just talking at lengths about what a superb writer Simon was and how inventive he was. Yeah, he and I both shared a common philosophy about how our job was not make always the kind of Doctor Who we both wanted to make, but we wanted to make the kind of Doctor Who that the audience would want, whether it's me with the audios and him with the books. But also a very big philosophy of finding new writers, of just always looking out for people rather than trying to just sitting back and going, these people are brilliant. I could sit down and just work with these 4 people for the next 10 years of my life, which I could have done and he could have done. And both of our lives would probably be a lot easier. But neither of us did. We both had this philosophy, born out of our conversations with each other, I suspect, that it was our job to foster the new talent and to sit back and let it grow. And we could just guide it as editors. I always remember Justin famously, he said this to me, it must have been on Instruments of Darkness, when I was having probably a strop about something he'd said. And he just said to me, you just got to remember that the editor's job is to make the writer look brilliant. If the editor looks brilliant, it's a mistake. But he said it's the editor's job is just to make the end product look that bit more brilliant than it already is. And I thought, yeah, and I used that very much as my philosophy as time went on with Big Finish as well, and saying to people, I'm not suggesting these rewrites because I think I want to write your script. I'm suggesting these rewrites because it'll be better. And all I want to do is have your name on the front cover of a CD and people go, God, that guy's a brilliant writer. That's all I wanted people to see of all these new talents that I was bringing through. And Justin was exactly the same. We had a shared philosophy of that's how it should work.
Gary, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your memories of Justin.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lisa Bowerman. I play Professor Bernice Summerfield and I also direct.
And it's fair to say that you've been involved in a fair amount of Justin Richards' work over the years.
Absolutely, and it wasn't until I looked up, and I'm sure you'll help me out with this, that I realised quite how many scripts I'd actually been in of Justin's. But I think most of all, the thing I will be most grateful for is Jago and Lightfoot. Justin oversaw the most magnificent series. I mean, obviously we were lucky with our cast, but Justin's foresight, his understanding of the era, of the scripts, also the legacy of Robert Holmes, who created the characters. There was a consistency of style, and I think he gave us something really, really very special.
I would have to agree 100% with that, because I think Dragon's Wrath, or Dragon's Wrath as you'd pronounce it down south,
That's
that
right.
was one of his that I did early on. And of course you did Whispers of Terror.
Yeah, Whispers of Terror was extraordinary because it was the first time I didn't have to play Bernice, and it's always nice to play a baddie. Sounds a bit perverse. And no, I thought that the whole premise of that was extremely clever, to have a sound creature, because it fitted the genre brilliantly. And he was very clever with that. I haven't listened to it for donkey's years, but I do remember having a great time on that. I think that there were issues with Dragon's Wrath, actually nothing to do with the story at all. We had issues because it was the last one we did before it went, this is Bernice, obviously, the last one we did before it went into original storylines, as it was an adaptation. And I think there were a lot of issues on the post-production of that, which doesn't take away how good the story was.
Something I only discovered today was that from Gary Russell was that the whole Benny setup, initially with the Braxitel collection and everything like that, that was all devised by Justin.
Apparently so. And in fact, it wasn't until I saw a post from Miles Richardson that I realised that he'd created Braxitel. What an amazing character. And how opposite from Justin could you possibly get? I mean, it's extraordinary. He comes up with sort of slightly Machiavellian character with the gentlest, sweetest man you could think of.
Yeah, because it was back in Theatre of War when he first debuted, which of course you later got to do the audio of.
We got to do, I must confess, I haven't read the book, but it was a great story, a very clever story.
Yeah, it's just all the lost Shakespeare plays and just the way the analogies. I mean, that's the thing that Justin, being such a well-read and literate man, and be able to bring that in, and particularly with Jago and Lightfoot, you'd have had that.
And what's so clever about that is that you can get a lot of very, very bright people who know their subject or very widely read won't be able to dramatize that in a way that's entertaining and a human drama. There are a lot of people who can write the facts, but facts in themselves don't make good drama. And I think Justin straddled that very, very cleverly.
I suppose for yourself as a performer, when you're working on these scripts, and particularly when directing as well, when you've got something that's been properly script edited, fully researched, it makes your job so much easier.
Absolutely. And I mean, when it comes to Justin being in the studio, having obviously script edited pretty much all of the series of Jago and Lightfoot, even if there's a small detail that you want to double check about, he was always there. Or even there's something maybe anachronistically, I kind of go, can we just find out about that? I mean, he was the most sympathetic, calm, reasonable person, and also, as you say, his script editing was immaculate as well. There was really very little you'd pick up on, if anything at all. He'd have kept everybody in line. Everything was consistent. Obviously, there's all the tangles of timelines and character plots to keep on. I don't know how my brain fries when I think about it. But all I do know is when you get a script and you pick it up and you go, this is fantastic. And it will be not just the brilliance of whichever writer is writing it, but also the management, where they're still keeping the style of that particular writer, but within the confines of a whole series. And it was a sort of an invisible hand. There are sometimes I think the script editors can get a bit kind of, I wouldn't do it this way, I mean, it's a bit like your art teacher at school. I remember an art teacher at school, they kind of go, yes, but I wouldn't do it like that. And you go, yeah, but I would, and that's my work, But there was a lovely collaborative relationship I think he had with everybody.
Very much so, because just everybody, the incredibly positive, lovely messages, not one negative about him, which is it's incredible, isn't it?
He was the gentlest of gentlemen and a very benign presence. He was always lovely to have in. There's a picture I took of him chatting with Trevor Baxter, who would always engage with everybody, as you can imagine, during the recordings. And he wore his intellect, if you wanted, and his reading very lightly, indeed. And that's always, I always find that very impressive in people who know tons but don't, march around showing it off. And he certainly didn't.
And I think putting him and Trevor together, that would have been a hell of a conversation to eavesdrop on.
I leave them to, they're far better read than I am, so it was like, off you go.
Yeah. Something that very few people will have seen are Justin's Jago and Lightfoot season preparatory documents.
Oh, I can't even imagine what that looks like.
Thankfully, he sent me them years ago for Big Finish companion work, and it's every season meticulously plotted out. Here's what the 4 stories are going to be. He'll put the basic outline as to what each story is in there, and then the writers will flesh it out. Some of them completely went in different directions, obviously with his blessing. Yeah. And it's incredible just to see how meticulously planned everything was.
And what's so brilliant is that you reminded me that he wrote The Bloodless Soldier, which is the first official of the series, not obviously Mahogany Murderers, which was Andy Lane's. But when I look at the threads that started in that very first episode, they run through all 13 series, there are little things about, Ellie's brother, there are little things about their relationship, and it was so cleverly balanced.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that, for initially it seems that Ellie's perhaps not going to be a major character, but the fact that she does become so prominent, and obviously that was good for yourself.
And also quick as well. But, they were beautiful characters, both of them to play.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing, that it's very much the world building that you got with the Braxitel collection, with Brax and Haas and everyone else, and repeating.
And also that understanding that if you create those characters, A, there has to be a consistency, but B, there has to be a reason why people want to listen to them and follow their story. And I think he was so clever at building those characters where they didn't become tedious, or you kind of go, oh, that would never have happened. I just think he balanced it brilliantly.
Yeah, I'm feeling that a full Jago and Lightfoot listen through from start to finish is coming on very soon.
I adore it. Absolutely. Do you know, I'm still very much in contact with one of Chris Benjamin's daughters, and she didn't really know much about Jago and Lightfoot until after he died, after Chris died, and I sent her some, and she just said, I'm enjoying these so much because it sounds so much like they're enjoying themselves as well. And she absolutely loves the series.
That's amazing. Absolutely. And still available from the Big Finish website right now. Got to get the plug in. Fantastic. Absolutely. So what is your main outstanding memory of Justin when you think of him?
I think it's funny because he was such a quiet, gentle soul that his tread was very light in everything. When he was in studio, you knew he was there and he was supportive, but he there was a sort of reassuring presence to Justin, and he'd always have an answer if you had a query, and he was just very lovely. I mean, I know it sounds a bit crass just to say that, but for somebody to be in a studio and just to be this lovely, benign presence, and also understand what you do as well, it was just lovely. And I think he's going to be missed horribly. I mean, it was, I have to say, when I heard about, obviously, those of us who knew what he was suffering from, and obviously I have slight reference to it because of my Denville association, and I know the different forms of the illness, and he had a particularly horrible version of it, and it broke my heart to hear that, because of all the people to get something so horrible and to have lived with it for so long as well. I do have to say I feel for the family as well. I think they must have had so much to deal with. I send them so much love and support, because that's tough times, and it breaks my heart to think there's somebody so lovely as Justin having to do that. But life's full of banana skins, and I'm afraid that one caught up. But in terms of Justin as a person, the person that we knew, he was lovely and talented, and he'll be missed.
Thank you, Lisa. So yeah, an amazing number of tributes there, and some very emotional words, because when I was speaking with Steve and Gary in particular, I was getting quite teary, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. So yeah, it's such a sad loss to Doctor Who and to Doctor Who fandom, and that's without even mentioning his family with Alison, Julian and Chris, because let's be honest, Justin kept this show going with Big Finish for many years.
Yeah, I think we've only been able to scrape the surface of his contribution. I mean, I remember the excitement of picking up the Clockwise Man, the first Ninth Doctor and Rose novel, and seeing that it was in Waterstones actually, Falkirk, where I picked that up, and the excitement of picking up the first brand new Ninth Doctor novel. So exciting. The stuff he did for the Fourth Doctor adventures, Jago and Lightfoot, Countermeasures. He's made contributions to so many ranges. Reintroduced the Rani. I mean, there's so many things that Justin's brought to Doctor Who. His legacy is not going to ever go away.
Most definitely not. And of course, he did also write the book The Legacy back in time for the 40th anniversary as well, which beautiful book, just perfectly researched and enough to keep the fans like us happy, and indeed members of the public who probably pick up and go, oh yeah, I remember Doctor Who. And all those other books he did, like Starships and Space Stations and all those range of books, which were really good fun. They were just pitched perfectly and just sort of gave you enough info to, as I said, for people like us to go, yep, that was worth a read. Lovely pictures in there and some good text, and yeah, so much stuff going on. And yeah, as you say, it won't be forgotten ever. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to share your memories of Justin's work and celebrate him.
Thank you, Kenny, and thank you for asking me.
And I think that we normally would play out the tune, but I think that perhaps it might be appropriate to play out with some words from Justin himself, talking about how his work in the wilderness years kept things going. So let's leave the last word to the one and only Mr. Justin Richards. Until next time, I've been Kenny Smith.
And I'm Matt Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We had a reception for 40 years of Doctor Who at the House of Commons, which was extraordinary. There was a lot of MPs and celebrities and people there, and Christopher Weller, who was one of the bosses at BBC Worldwide, came up to me at that, and we'd chatted a couple of times before, so I knew him vaguely. And it had just been announced that Russell was bringing back the new series, and he said, this is because of us. He said, we're the ones who kept the faith during all these years. We're the ones who knew it was going to come back, and we've kept it alive. And without us, it probably wouldn't have happened. And I think there's a lot of truth in that.